Multilingual Redditors. What is your "they didn't realize I spoke their language" story? I'm American, but can read and speak Russian on an intermediate level. A few years ago, while visiting St. Petersburg, I was buying tickets to Peterhof. All of the signs at the ticket booth were in Russian, and I could read the ticket prices. The ticket agent assumed I didn't know Russian, and tried to tell me the ticket cost 3 times more than the stated price. I looked her right in the eye and said in Russian, "I see on the board here that the ticket I want is X rubles." Her jaw dropped, and the ticket agent sitting next to her started laughing her butt off. Story 2. Flemish guy here, working as a safari guide in the Kruger area, South Africa. One time my boss asks me to go pick up a family for the reserve gate, do an afternoon game drive with them, and drop them off again afterwards. This was very uncommon. Normally we only do game drives with people that book a room in our own lodge on the reserve. So I pick them up, introduce myself, and go over all the rules in English. They reply in English, or at least the dad does, and normally I can pick up straight away if it's someone from France, Belgium, Holland, or Germany. But his English was Oxford English, so I thought, hey, English people, and off we went. 10 minutes into the game drive, I hear them speak in Flemish. Not only that, my own dialect. Side note, every Flemish town has a dialect. We can hear what region/province other Flemish people are from, and if from the same region, we can often even pinpoint the exact town or community. Oh, I was gonna have fun with these folks. Found a nice few animal sightings, spoke English the whole time, but then one sentence to the next, switched to their exact dialect. I thought, now they're gonna be surprised. Nope. We all kept chatting in Flemish now. Only 20 minutes later, the daughter, maybe 10 years old, goes, "Hey, wait a minute, he speaks Flemish." After we all had a good laugh, I asked them where they're from. They lived literally a street away from me. It's a small world, folks. Story 3. I lived in South Korea for 3 years, but I never learned too much of the language. A friend of mine is 100% Korean, but is very tall and was educated in America and New Zealand, so she has an American accent. Her co-teachers at her school all assumed she couldn't speak Korean, so they would talk crap about her constantly, and she would just listen on and feel terrible. She said nothing for a whole year, until she had to speak at the end of the year ceremony. The school offered her someone to translate, but she refused, and in front of 800 or so students and faculty members, delivered her address in perfect Korean. She subtly called out the coworkers that had spent an entire year calling her a foreign pig. Apparently, one started crying from the shame of it. I wish I'd got to see that. You're not allowed to say those things and then cry about it. Like, oh no, I got caught, boo-hoo. Am I supposed to feel bad for you or something? If you're making fun of someone just in a language they can't hear, that doesn't make it morally okay. I don't understand that logic at all. You got caught, and you deserve to as well. Story 4. My cousin is a big white guy who studied for 2 years in Japan during college. He worked for one of the heads of Honda America for a few years. When the head guy learned that he spoke Japanese, he would make sure my cousin was in all of the meetings and phone conferences with the Japanese branch. My cousin would listen to everything the Japanese would be saying to each other and report it to his boss during breaks. As such, the boss looked like a psychic to the Japanese, because after break he would address their concerns without being prompted. The boss made mad bonuses every quarter, and always funneled a bunch of that to my cousin. Story 5. Most of these stories are a bit negative, so here's a lighter one. My mum's a linguist and speaks about 15 languages fluently, and as such I picked up a couple along the way. Most of my childhood was spent in Germany, so I have a firm grasp of the language, which doesn't really seem to match my appearance. I'm a 6'3", 220-pound, black man who speaks German. Now, this isn't too uncommon a sight in Germany, sure, but in North America, I'm a freaking unicorn. So I was standing at the bus stop one day in the heart of downtown Toronto, and there were these two 60-something-year-old German ladies who were not having a good time. They were trying to find the art gallery and were fed up with the fact they were having such a crappy time navigating because their English-speaking children had left them alone for the day. I didn't have anything particularly important planned for that day, so I turned to them and said something to the effect of, "You know, our city has a lot to offer if you know where to go. Would you two like to show me where the gallery is and a couple places you can get lunch along the way?" They nearly fainted. They were so happy they found someone who spoke German and couldn't stop taking pictures with me to show their family, saying that I was the guy who saved their day. I walked them to the gallery and gave them a bit of an impromptu walking/bus tour along the way. That was the day I gained 2 omas. Story 6. I was shopping with friends for clothes, and these two ladies that worked at the store were outside of my fitting room speaking in Spanish. They kept criticizing me for taking so long to try on clothes and referred to me as dumb gringo, and jokingly asked me if I needed any assistance in English. They didn't realize I was Hispanic until I came out of the room and responded in Spanish that, no, I didn't need any of their help. They got so red. Story 7. Oh, I Love this one. So I was working at a dental clinic in Germany, and these two guys walk in and start speaking in Arabic, not knowing that both I and my supervisor can understand it. The first guy, the actual patient, is nervously telling his friend this would never work, and his friend is telling him to shut up and play along. So the supervisor and I try to figure out what kind of game they're trying to play. Apparently, they were trying to lie about the patient's age to get his dental treatment done for free. I don't know how that worked, I was just an intern. Unlucky for him. Also, his teeth told the truth. You can't fake being 16 when your wisdom teeth are all the way out. So me and my supervisor shut up about it, and I'm in actual pain trying to hold back from laughing as the friend is convincing the patient that we're idiots who don't speak Arabic and can't understand their trick. Of course, that is until I can't anymore, and decide to discuss the case with my supervisor, right there in front of them, in Arabic. I have never seen someone turn so many different colors so fast. Story 8. When I started working at McDonald's at 16, none of the other employees realized I could speak a fair amount of Spanish. A few of my coworkers would talk crap about me in Spanish and I pretended for a few weeks I didn't know what they were saying. Then one day a manager told me she was worth more than me because she was bilingual. So I told her, in Spanish, I was actually trilingual. The looks on their faces when they realized I spoke Spanish all along were priceless. Story 9. My family and I went to Sri Lanka for 2 weeks to see where my mom grew up and general beach stuff. So for some reason, we were like the only people in the hotel we were staying at aside from a wedding party that left a day after we got there. A few days in, there was another family, I believe from Suriname. We were all chilling at the pool and decided to play a game of water polo against each other. Things got exciting, and one of the daughters yelled out something in Dutch, like, "Go for the big fat guy" or something. And my Dutch dad replied, "What big fat guy?" And everybody laughed. Just a simple story, but it was pretty sweet. This one is pretty sweet because I'm sure the daughters didn't mean anything by it. And the dad got to be like, "Oh, I know what you're saying." So, a funny, harmless story. And a good vacation story too. Story 10. Me and my friend were sharing a cab with two girls we didn't know. Just decided to share a taxi with them because it was a long way and we wanted to save some money. They started speaking in Swedish, not knowing my friend is also Finnish Swede. Her mother language is Swedish. She has been in Swedish school but is Finnish and speaks Finnish fluently. I understand Swedish, but I was too drunk to care. Suddenly, she texts me, "They are planning to leave us with the bill." I texted we should tell the driver. So my friend just said, "These girls will pay half of this before they leave." He got the hint and didn't open the doors before they paid. Also another time I was in an airport with my aunt. She had broken her leg, so she was in a wheelchair. But because we were going to a beach holiday, we decided not to cancel it. Now my aunt has lived in Germany and speaks German fluently. I've lived there too, so I understand it well, but I'm not fluent. We speak Finnish, something just to pass the time while the flight attendant asks us to go on the plane first. This middle-aged man turns to his wife and says in German, "I don't think disabled people should be allowed on planes." My aunt, who is a true badass, asks me to stop. I was pushing her wheelchair, turns to the man and says in perfect German, "I'm sorry, sir, but I broke my leg and didn't want to cancel my holiday plans. You're being incredibly offensive towards handicapped people, and I feel sorry for your wife. Have a nice flight." He turned red, couldn't even say anything to us, just looked away. His wife looked mortified. Story 11. The people at the Chinese food place on my campus spoke Chinese to the exchange students. But even though I spoke Chinese, I just always spoke English to them, since I have an accent when I do speak Chinese. But one day I got all meat, no rice, since I had a rice maker at home. And when I was paying, the lady says to the person beside her, "This fatty wants meat with no rice." And I responded in Chinese, "Actually, I have rice at home." They didn't charge me for the order and started giving me a bit extra whenever I go there. Edit. Everyone saying they probably weren't saying it in an insulting way is correct. Like they were saying fat butt, but more along the lines of fatty or tubby. Story 12. While I'm Spanish, I don't quite look like the stereotypical Spaniard. Light skin color, blondish, green eyes. When I was living in London, I got into several situations. The top one was on the tube back home. I think there was a football game, Chelsea, Barcelona, and this couple was going to the stadium and I was just beside them. Tube had a hard stop and I accidentally fell a bit over on one of them. I apologized in English as I didn't realize they were Spaniards too. They started talking to each other, saying stuff like, "This freaking fat female dog nearly smashed in the ground," and things of the sort for almost 5 minutes. When they left the tube, he looked at me one last time laughing, and I told him in perfect Spanish, "Enjoy the game, you little piece of crap." His face going pale as the doors were closing was enough satisfaction for a week. Story 13. So I don't speak Spanish fluently, but I understand it just fine. I used to sell cars in Houston, and as you can imagine, we had a lot of bilingual Spanish speakers come to buy cars. They never asked if my super clean-cut white guy self spoke Spanish, so I never told them I did. It was fun to have a couple that would speak English to me and Spanish to each other. They would literally tell each other everything, like how much they wanted to pay and their negotiating tactics. They would say things like, if he offers to take $500 off, let's do it, but I'm going to ask for $1,000. So once they said yes, inevitably one would ask the other a product question in Spanish, and I would jump in and answer in English. The looks on their faces when they have that aha moment were priceless. Story 14. A friend of mine was visiting my country for a few days from Italy. He was staying in a hostel dorm that happened to have a group of German tourists sharing it. He said anytime he was back in the dorm, he would hear them laughing and making fun of him in German. Little did they know, he speaks fluent German. He stayed quiet for the few days he was there and remained perfectly pleasant, speaking English to them when they had conversations, but otherwise keeping to himself. On the last day, as he was leaving the dorm, he turned to the group to say goodbye and added, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your trip in German. He said the look on their faces was priceless when they realized he had understood everything they said about him. Now, I only speak one language, but I feel like it would be weird, like if I knew someone didn't speak English, to be talking about them in English right in front of them. Like, sure, they don't know what I'm saying, probably, but it doesn't make me feel any less weird about talking about them, let alone insulting them. I don't get it. I don't get the mindset. Story 15. Not me, but my stepmother. She grew up in Japan and speaks fluent Japanese. She looks Italian and white. She has an olive skin tone, and since she is only a quarter Japanese, she doesn't look like she's from any East Asian-speaking country. One day, her and some friends went to get their nails, both hands and feet, done at a salon for some girl time. The ladies who were doing the work were speaking fluent Japanese and were mostly gossiping about men and other things until they got to the feet part of said procedure. My stepmother's friend is a little overweight, and she doesn't have runway model style of feet, while the ladies who work at the salon are just starting to make fun of her in Japanese, laughing and giggling, enjoying themselves at someone else's misfortune and looks. My stepmother said she let this go on for too long. It was about 5 minutes of them talking crap before my stepmother replied in Japanese. Her comment to them was something along the lines of, I didn't realize we needed to look like princesses to get service here, or something like that. The lady stopped, looked at my stepmother with extreme guilt. They apologized in English and were silent for the remainder of the time. Story 16. When I was stationed in Korea, I was getting a haircut, and the hairdresser had like an assistant or a new person helping her. She says to the main girl, he looks like a baby. I have a baby face and was 22 at the time. I responded in Korean with, I look like a baby. She was really startled and embarrassed and noped out of there for the rest of the haircut. The main hairdresser took advantage of being able to talk with me in Korean though. Story 17. I'm a Mexican who speaks Hebrew fluently. I was actually in the US in a deli around the time when the World Cup was going on in 2014. I had been wearing a national team jersey and had been watching with family. We usually paint the colors of our flag on our cheeks. Tradition. The game was over and we were getting food. So my parents, brother, and I walk into a booth. We sit and the people behind us, 3 middle-aged women, started speaking in Hebrew, saying, look at these stupid Mexicans, which should have been a giveaway since the word for Mexicans in Hebrew is really close to just the word Mexican. Well, I turn around, look at them and answer in Hebrew, yes, we are very proud of our country and the great job they're doing at the World Cup. If it bothers you, you can move. The look on their faces was priceless. I've never felt so empowered until Mexico did a crap job and got eliminated from the cup. So OP wrote the Hebrew word for Mexican, or at least spelled it out in Roman characters, and I didn't even want to take a chance. I looked it up, tried to find a pronunciation. You know how strangely hard it is to find pronunciation of a Hebrew word? Every site I went to was like entirely in Hebrew. I couldn't do it. I'm sorry. I tried my best. Story 18. I'm Swiss and Peruvian and live in Peru, so I don't look at all like a Swiss guy. There were 2 Swiss girls sitting behind me on a bus talking about Latino guys. Then one of them asked the other if she found me attractive. I turned around and said that I would love to know that too. The look of confusion and shame was priceless. Then we all just laughed. Now, I've got 2 new friends. Story 19. We had a large family reunion dinner at a restaurant, and we were all sharing stories. My funny uncle was telling us how he used to pretend he was deaf and his sister would translate. To prove it, he asked the waitress to get the manager. When he came over, my uncle started signing to him with made-up and exaggerated gestures. My aunt told him that the food was good and the service was excellent, all while the manager just smiled and nodded. When they were done talking, the manager said, in sign language, he spoke ASL and knew it was bullcrap. We blew up laughing and my uncle's face turned beet red. With sign language is a risky one, because you don't know who knows sign language. Like the other ones, people made wrong but educated guesses like, oh, you don't look like someone who would speak this language, but ASL? Anyone could speak that, for real. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, there's a huge uptick in the amount of people who speak ASL too, which I think is great, personally. Story 20. I'm Brazilian and was flying to Rio from Atlanta. There were these 2 very attractive girls with their mother speaking English very fluently, and one of them had their seat right next to mine. We exchanged some courtesy in English, as I just assumed they were American and so did they. They were Brazilian Americans and so didn't have an accent. And I started speaking English from a young age, so as long as I don't have to talk too much, I can go unnoticed. So they started putting their carry-on luggage in the bin overhead, and the mother says to her daughters, "Poor thing, he thinks I'll let one of you sit next to him," in Portuguese. So I just turn to her and say, in Portuguese, "Don't worry, ma'am, I'm just being polite. I have a girlfriend and it'll be a pleasure to share this flight with you." She just went, "Oh," and then sat there in silence for the rest of the flight. Story 21. Me and my sister are Hungarian, but grew up in England and speak fluent Hungarian and English with natural accents. We'd also spend most of our summers growing up in Hungary, where since we speak English perfectly, people assumed in public we were from England, and would occasionally say mean or negative things not expecting us to understand. There are few things more satisfying than replying in perfect Hungarian, "What did you say?" and watching people's eyes widen in panic and profusely apologize. Story 22. I have a reverse story. Deep in the night, I leave work. Small road in a small city in rural China, so no public lighting. I go by the side of the road until a taxi comes by. Finally find one. We spend the next 15 minutes speaking about all and nothing. Weather, road repairs, so on. We arrive at my residence. The driver opens the front light to help count the cash. Blood-curdling scream. The driver says, "You're not Chinese." Nope, not last time I checked. Note, I'm not a scary person. 75 kg white nerd wearing pants and a dress shirt. Story 23. Here's one where everyone felt good at the end. When I was living in China, I used to run in this giant park. One morning on one of my runs, I see these 3 young men hanging out by the path. Not too many foreigners in the area, and not too many joggers either, so they immediately notice and start talking about me. One guy says, "Is she Russian?" There was a small but significant Russian population in the city, so not a bad guess. Another guy, "Talk to her." First guy, "Nah, she wouldn't understand." By this time, I'm right next to them, so I yelled over my shoulder, "Yes, I do." As I ran past, they lost their crap. I could still hear them laughing after I went around the bend. Story 24. I once interviewed for a part-time school holiday job together with a friend of mine. My friend is Chinese, the majority race of the country I live in. I, however, am quite clearly not. The first thing the HR manager says when he sees me is, "We need someone who speaks Mandarin," a criterion not stated anywhere in the employment ad, and which subtly translates to Chinese candidates preferred. My friend, while ethnically Chinese, speaks little to no Mandarin. I, on the other hand, speak it fluently. Probably as a test, the HR manager decides to field us questions in Mandarin, clearly intent on cutting me out of the interview. My friend turns pale as he stumbles along to answer the questions posed in whatever halting Mandarin he can scrape together. The manager then turns to me rather arrogantly, waiting for my reply. It gave me great joy to tell him straight to his face, "Thank you for the opportunity, but clearly I'm not the right candidate you're looking for to fill this position, since I'm not Chinese," in crisp, fluent Mandarin. The look of bewilderment on his face was priceless. Okay, am I going insane? I feel like I've heard the word priceless more in this thread than ever before. What is going on? Story 25. I recently went to Japan for my first ever international trip, and was totally prepared to have to struggle through all my day-to-day interactions in Japanese, but was surprised at how widespread even a basic understanding of English is over there. Everyone assumes you won't speak any Japanese at all, so they stick to as much English as they're comfortable with, or you basically just play charades. At a restaurant in Kobe, the waitress was practically fluent in English, so we chatted a while. It came up that I'm studying Japanese, so we made a little small talk and she was impressed. Then the owner came over to talk but wasn't as confident in his English, so he had the waitress translate. He was asking all these questions about where we'd been so far, where we were staying, how we liked everything, if we'd been down to Kobe port yet, etc. It was simple enough that I understood 100% without her translation, and the waitress could tell. Finally, she says to him in Japanese, "By the way, he understands what you're saying." His eyes practically bugged out of his head. He got super excited and asked if we wouldn't mind waiting 30 minutes for him to close up and send everyone home. So I wait, he closes everything up, and we all end up hanging out that night. He drove us around the city, bought us drinks, even drove back to the Airbnb. Japan is amazing. Story 26. Back in 2010, I was at the Hmong New Year in St. Paul/Minneapolis with my family. This event is pretty big, and there used to be literally thousands of Hmong people there. It's an event where we basically celebrate our heritage. I am Hmong, Southeast Asian, but I look like I'm Hispanic just to give some background. Anyway, I had to go to the bathroom because, I'm only human and all. When I went to go wash my hands, these 2 older guys, probably about 35 or 40, come in, and as soon as they see me, they say something in Hmong along the lines of, "These damn Mexicans thinking they can come into our new year. Maybe we should call the cops to take them back home to Mexico, ha ha ha." Well, in comes my cousin by sheer luck, so I ask him in Hmong, "Hey, where did you guys go?" Last time I saw you guys was at the ball tossing area. It's this weird courting activity that involves throwing a tennis ball / softball while flirting. We end our very short conversation, and then, as I was exiting the bathroom, I made absolutely sure I gave the most judgmental look ever to these two men. It worked like a charm, and you could tell by their facial expressions, they knew they messed up. Damn, so far in this thread, this has to be the most just overtly racist. Like, what is wrong with these guys? Story 27. I was in a hotel elevator with my wife in Osaka, Japan. The Miyako Marriott, to be exact. It is a popular hotel for tourists. We were going up the elevator to our room on the 54th floor. In the elevator with us is a Chinese family that speaks Cantonese. They must have assumed we were Japanese or some other type of Asian because they started to tease their preteen daughter about how badly she needed to take a crap. They were laughing, and the mother was teasing her about how she can almost see it coming out or something. Our floor came first, and when it did, I turned to them and said good night in Cantonese. Their face was priceless, and we got out of the elevator. My wife called me a jerk while laughing her butt off. Then we got back to our rooms and took a crap too. Story 28. Was walking to class with my girlfriend when we ran into the janitor who also happened to work with my girlfriend at Home Depot. They greeted each other in Spanish, and then the janitor asked in Spanish, "Is he the same or the other one?" She looked at me, knowing I knew what was said, and tried to laugh it off. Edit. Some follow-up. As that happened, we both walked into an elevator together because we were heading to Spanish class. When we got in the elevator, I got upset and questioned her. She seemed to be just as surprised as I was about the whole situation, and claims she didn't know why he would say that. No, I didn't break up with her, and we've been dating for over a year now. I assume it's because a couple weeks prior we ran into the same janitor who had seen me with my girlfriend for the first time, and said something about how I was cute. Couple weeks later, with a beard and haircut, he probably forgot what I looked like, so I blamed it on that. Nevertheless, was wary about the whole thing, and she has even questioned why I never thought more of it. Gut feeling, I guess. Story 29. Took the employee shuttle with a bunch of my South American exchange student coworkers. For about a month, I slept in the back while they conversed in Spanish. One day, they told a joke, and I laughed out loud. They all stopped and looked at me, realizing I could understand Spanish the whole time. This really broke the ice between us, and some of them even became lifelong friends. And it led to a romantic relationship as well. OP, it's not even like they were talking crap. You were just really shy or something. And hey, fair enough, talking to new people is hard. But you had a perfectly good in there if you did want to talk to them. That being said, sounds like it all worked itself out anyway, so not worried about it. Story 30. Not me, but my friend's mom. She was visiting Japan with a friend. She, white but speaks fluent Japanese, and her friend, Japanese descent but only speaks English, were on a train. Some guys approached the Japanese-looking friend and said something along the lines of, "Stop speaking English, you're in Japan. If you're in Japan, you speak Japanese. Your immigrant friend doesn't belong here." In Japanese, of course. Well, my friend's mom has all the guts in the world. Stood up and just started going off on the guy in fluent Japanese, and the guy's just standing there flabbergasted. Wish I was there. Story 31. Was in Germany, and a middle school teacher asked me to come in as a guest for one of her English classes. The teacher introduced me. I said hello and that I was from the US and happy to be in their class. The teacher said, "So, do you have any questions in English for an American? What do you think an American is like?" One of the kids near the front says in German, under his breath kind of, but definitely loud enough that most of the class can hear, "Fat and stupid." The kids laugh and the teacher turns bright red. I don't know what to do, so I just say, well, of course, many Americans can speak German in German. The kid almost crapped himself. He looked like a baby deer that had wandered on stage at a Beyoncé concert. I thought he was just being a jerk and had intended for me to understand what he was saying. Apparently, no. He had no idea that an American in Germany in their language class might actually speak their language. Story 32. I'm fluent in Spanish, and was in a bank line in Lima, the capital of a South American city, and these two elderly, middle-aged women were in front of me having a mostly quiet chat. One was telling the other about this new young guy at work she was banging and describing all the crazy banging they were doing, going into detail about all sorts of stuff. The other wanted to know what he looked like, and she was kind of describing him badly. She kind of did a sly look around the bank, waited a few seconds, and said in Spanish, "He looks like this guy behind us but with blonde hair, much better looking and a much better dresser." She did a good job of not gesturing towards me when she said it, but it didn't stop me from hearing. So she goes back to discussing details about hooking up with him at work. They didn't notice the line has moved. And so, without a warning throat clear, I just say, "We all love the details back here, but can you move forward?" She went white as a ghost, and they didn't really talk for the rest of the wait. It was hilarious. Okay, regardless if the person directly behind you speaks your language or not, insane thing to be talking about in public. No? Like, in the line, at a bank? We're not even, like, at our own table at a cafe or something, chatting gossip. Nope, weird place to do it. Story 33. I was on a tour bus with my grandmother going to a luau in Hawaii. My grandmother spoke fluent Italian, as her parents were both Italian immigrants. Two young women behind us were speaking to each other in Italian, probably assuming no one else would understand it. My grandmother told me that they were insulting everyone on the bus. She let it go on for a while, but just kept getting angrier and angrier as the ride went on. Finally, she turned around and told them off, telling them they should be ashamed of themselves for being so rude. They looked embarrassed and apologized to her profusely. Getting told off by a grandmother on a tour bus was not what they expected. Story 34. My family and I were flying to Greece from Houston to visit family, and two groups are also on this 10-hour flight. Student ambassador middle/high schoolers, mostly girls, from the US, and a youth male Greek soccer team. And of course, they were all sitting by us with their chaperones at the other end of the plane. The boys are hitting on and flirting with these girls about 2 to 4 years younger than them, all over each other. They moved seats so they can sit with the girls, and they were so loud and obnoxious the whole plane was mad. Except the crew, apparently, who did nothing about it. The boys were also talking amongst themselves in Greek. Now, my mother speaks fluently, from years of Greek school and many a summer raised in the Peloponnese hillside. At some point, while all three of us were just sitting there reading, sleeping, or trying to watch the tiny TV at the front of the plane and listen over the kids constantly talking, my mother jumps up, goes over to the group and says, "These boys are calling you fat and stupid. They also think American girls are so easy. Oh, by the way, she points at one guy who is all over this one girl, is 18. They have girlfriends waiting for them in the terminal. Now shut up so I can sleep." They all shuffled back to their appropriate seats, silent. Best flight ever after that. I love my mom. Story 35. Uplifting one. I'm white and was at a bar in Beijing dancing with a couple of white friends. I overhear a girl telling her friends I'm cute and deciding whether to say hi to me. Now, the thing about being white in Beijing is that you stand out in any bar you're in. Don't even have to be attractive. I know Chinese from study and exchange, so after like 10 minutes of on and off dancing near the group, I leaned in and said, "I think you're cute too," to the girl in Chinese. They all erupted like geese, and I got laid that night. Story 36. This happened to my brother and father while they were traveling. Some dude walks up to my brother thinking he's a local and starts talking to him in Farsi. When he realized my brother didn't understand, started saying really rude things about him and my dad being stupid. Now my dad, fluent in Farsi, comes over and rips this jerk a second butthole. The dude feigned being apologetic and made excuses for his attitude. As he was walking away, he started muttering more foul things about them, but in Turkish this time. Oh, Dad speaks Turkish as well. Proceeds to rip him a third. Story 37. I was in an elevator going back up to my apartment after working out some 2 years ago, and I had a man bun at the time. There were 6 other guys in the elevator speaking Arabic, so I just listened as I usually do. Then one of the guys goes, "Haha, look at this guy's hair, it's ridiculous." I turn around and respond, "Hey, you want to say that again?" The other 5 dudes proceeded to die of laughter, with one of them screaming, "I knew you were Arab! I knew you were Arab!" I ended up laughing alongside them to their one friend who felt super awkward. Story 38. I sometimes volunteer in a local charity shop, and although I don't speak much Welsh, I understand a lot. So I know if people are dissing the special needs volunteers in Welsh, or assume that I have special needs. If they buy something, I respond in Welsh. That usually shuts them up. And because I have Swedish family and know the odd phrase, any Swedish tourists we get coming in are quite impressed that I can identify them as such and say thank you in their language. Story 39. Years ago, the placement of my bedroom was such that I could often hear my next-door neighbors chatting as they walked from their car to their front door. The volume seemed to indicate that they intended for me to hear, but assumed rightfully I couldn't understand their language. I couldn't even figure out what language they were speaking, let alone what they were saying. However, one night, my partner, now husband, was over, and he could identify the language because, well, he spoke it. They were calling my roommates and me alcoholic harlots. Story 40. I was with my French friend in a corner shop when he was visiting me in Manchester, UK. His English is really bad, so we were speaking French. 2 guys were behind us in the queue. My friend told me he wanted to try and speak English to the guy on the till, so I let him. He asked for something in broken English, and the till guy didn't understand him, so he asked him to repeat him. At this point, the guys behind us were getting frustrated. One of them said, "Frickin' foreigners, they should just go home to where they came from." I turned around and told them, I am home and he's trying his best, and told them they were jerks. The second guy seemed embarrassed, though, like he didn't share the same views. I don't understand people like that at all. They go to Spain on holiday and speak English to everyone, and when someone visits their country and tries to speak, it's still not good enough. Want no secret, OP? Generally, people like that are just more hateful than average. It'd be great if there were a way to explain it, but I don't think there is. For some reason, they just think that people not like them should be the focus of the hate too. It sucks, but hey, they exist. Story 41. Two fairly new coworkers were talking in Creole to each other. It was a bit upsetting for the other coworkers who didn't understand. One day they were talking crap about our company in Creole. Now, I ain't no snitch, so I didn't tell anyone, but I did go and greet them in Creole. They were like, "Oh, crap, you understand us?" Hey, no biggie. They had their reasons to talk crap, but it was funny to see their reaction. Story 42. I'm half Chinese, quarter English, quarter Irish, and was born and raised in London. I don't look particularly British, or indeed Chinese, but I definitely look foreign. In the wake of Brexit, I happened to be on the phone to my mother, Chinese, while on the train commuting to work. So I was speaking Mandarin. While on the phone with her, I overheard some little jerk grumbling about the frickin' Chinese in this country. Brexit, borders, immigrants, Muslims, Polish builders taking our jobs, stealing our benefits, or whatever. But a slur got into it a couple of times too. Clearly, this man had been emboldened by the vote to leave the EU and felt justified in airing his racism, feeling there were lots of like-minded others. English, very much so, being my first language, meant that I turned to him and just said, "You freaking what, mate?" in my clearly from South London accent. At this point, he immediately started to backpedal and said I was alright because I was one of us, whatever the hell that meant. So I got called out for being a foreigner in my own country, which is both amusing and sad. Story 43. I once worked as a door-to-door salesman for a concentrated multi-surface cleaner made from enzymes or something. And look, I get it. People don't like being bugged at home. But hey, just tell me that. I'll be on my way with a "sorry for bugging you at home." Don't lie to me. This one guy interrupted my pitch with "no hablo inglés," so I backtracked, apologized, and began my sales pitch completely in Spanish. When he heard a couple of sentences of this, he said, "No, thank you, we don't want any cleaner." To which I replied, "No hablo inglés." Story 44. When I was teaching kids in Japan, I would respond with English only to their Japanese. I did this for a few reasons. To make them think I didn't speak Japanese, to make them use English more, and so I could scare the crap out of them once I did decide to speak Japanese. Some kid in English school didn't do his homework. When I asked him for it, he told me in English that he forgot his book. He then turns to his classmate and says in Japanese that his book is in his bag and he didn't do his homework because he couldn't be bothered. Well, I said nothing. Come the end of class. His mother is waiting in the reception along with my Japanese manager, so I tell the manager in English that he didn't do his homework. I hear the conversation between kid and mom, with him giving the same "forgot" crap. So I just say in perfect Japanese, "Why are you saying you forgot the book? When I asked you in class, you told the other students in your bag and you didn't do it because you couldn't be bothered. I'm sorry, didn't you know that I could understand Japanese?" Mom opens the bag, finds the book, tells him to sit in the reception doing his homework. Kid cries. All is good. Story 45. Was on both ends of this as a deaf person myself. On one side, this one time the cashiers at a store realized I was deaf, and so started talking to each other about me when they thought I wasn't looking. They also didn't know I had my hearing aids and could lip read. Their comments weren't too negative, mostly the typical stuff about deaf people by people who are completely clueless about how deafness worked. When I brought my stuff to the checkout, I kindly reminded them that it's a pretty bad idea to talk about somebody thinking they can't understand what you're talking about, because the chances are they do in fact understand what you're talking about. Look on their faces, classic. Now, on the other side, one time my best friend and I were watching people at the mall and we started randomly rating the men around us in sign language. There was this one dude sitting near us and we started rating his looks and his body. I said he looked like he had a nice butt and his eyes were really beautiful with the color of the deep ocean. So I rated him at 10 out of 10. Then he came over to us and told us, in sign language, "Thanks for the compliments, ladies, you really made my day." We were both so shocked and embarrassed. Story 46. I was riding the metro in Montreal, and my car was pretty quiet, except for family presumably on vacation from the States. They were having a pretty loud conversation in English about how they were a bit lost. The wife was demanding that the husband ask someone on the train for help, but he was refusing, as he only knew a couple of words in French. He said no one would understand him. Little did they know that probably a third of Montrealers are Anglophone or allophone, and that most of the time the Francophones on the metro that day would have at least understood a simple request for directions. Finally, the husband walks over to someone on the car to ask for help. Before he can get 2 words out, the person, who would have heard their entire previous conversation, responds in perfect English. The next stop is the one you want. The whole car snickered a bit as the realization washed over the family that maybe people in Montreal speak a bit more English than they realized. Story 47. A lady on the bus was being a jerk and slagging people off in Greek until she got to me. She was being excessively nasty about my chipped nail varnish. I don't know, maybe she was having a bad day. As soon as I clocked it, I turned around and looked her dead in the eye with my very Greek face, and she stopped. She then sat in the seat in front of me where I sat and called my mom, also Greek, who I had a conversation with for the duration of the bus journey about the rude lady who slagged my nails off because she thought I couldn't understand. All in Greek. Story 49. Cable guy here. Being a white guy, most people don't realize that I know how to speak and write in Spanish. I run into so many situations where I can run under the radar and just do my job without someone knowing I can understand them completely. Every once in a while, I subtly let them know that I can understand them. I was doing an installation at a house where the family only spoke Spanish and the order requested for a Spanish-speaking tech. I showed up at the door, the husband opened the door and automatically assumed I couldn't speak Spanish. His English was near perfect and he greeted me, showed me around, and where he wanted everything. Guy who can't speak Spanish. I specifically told him to send someone who can speak Spanish so I didn't have to deal with this crap. He's going to be lazy as hell and not do the job right. I bet the jerk is expecting a tip after doing a crappy job and I'll have to fix it myself. The dude went on and on the entire time I was there talking crap. And well, at the end of the appointment, I was mad. Well, I didn't show it, but he thought it was funny to talk crap in front of me, smile on his face while acting like he wasn't saying anything about me. So I looked at him and told him in Spanish, "Your installation is done. If you have any questions, you can call the company yourself and they'll be able to get someone who speaks Spanish to help you." He looked at me with a shocked expression, so I continued. "Next time, you should ask if the person can speak Spanish before talking crap." His buddy hit the floor laughing as I left the customer standing there feeling like an idiot. Story 50. My grandmother, who grew up in a Yiddish-speaking household but doesn't look particularly Jewish, lives in an area in a large Hasidic community. She has many stories of people saying all sorts of things in Yiddish assuming she can't understand, but I have one in particular. She was in the supermarket, and a little Hasidic boy of about 3 or 4 is wandering around, clearly lost. He sort of nuzzles up against her skirt and says, "Mama, Mama," in Yiddish. She replies in Yiddish that she's not his mom, but he can come with her and they'll find her together. The little kid looks up at her with a look of horror and runs away screaming, "Mama, Mama, the Shiksa speaks Yiddish." Story 51. I'm from the US, and when I was 11, my family went to France for a couple of weeks. My dad was a very smart man. He graduated college when he was 18 and had a love of languages. He was fluent in French, Spanish, and German, and he lived in France for a year or two. He came back to the US and taught French for a few years before getting his JD and PharmD. He was constantly trying to teach us French whenever he could when we were little. He kept in touch with his French professor from college, and when we were in France, we stayed with them in Saint-Hilaire. They had a small party with some of their friends, and everyone sat around talking and drinking wine. As much as he tried to teach us French, we could only do as much as ordering food and reading restaurant menus and such. So everyone was talking in English except for one man's wife that was there and didn't speak English. The hosts were translating most things for her. At one point, the man says something in French like, "The Americans don't value things like learning foreign languages." Not knowing my dad spoke French. My dad looks at him and, in French, replies something along the lines of, "You're right. A lot of Americans aren't introduced to foreign languages until they're older and already out of the prime time of their life to start learning." And this was why he started teaching his kids French as early as possible, and even why he brought his kids to France, hoping we'd gain an appreciation for another language and culture. I didn't know what the guy had said or what my dad had said until after we left, but I remember the look on the guy's face and how he was clearly apologizing repeatedly. The host laughed too and explained my dad's history with French and his education. To say the man was embarrassed would be an understatement. Friday will be 13 years since my dad passed away at 55 years old. He was such an awesome person and loved by everyone he met. He would never take offense to something, even like that guy. He was from a tiny southern town in the middle of nowhere and grew up with nothing. He worked his butt off to get where he was in life. Cancer sucks. Story 52. I went on a class trip to France my senior year of high school. We learned about and enjoyed French art, history, and culture, of course. But being 17-year-old males, my friend Mitch and I were far more interested in the topless beaches we'd get to visit. So Mitch and I set ourselves up on the rocky beach one beautiful sunny day and awaited a parade of beautiful and topless French women. At first, we were a bit disappointed. Apparently, topless swimming was more popular with 80-year-old French women than we'd imagined. Eventually, a young couple set up a towel right next to us. As we listened into their conversation, we realized they're both American, and they're arguing. She wanted to go topless, and he didn't want her to. "I don't want a bunch of guys staring at your breasts," he said. "But everyone here is French," she argued. "I probably stand out more by not being topless than I would without the bikini." Now, I was on this trip with other kids from French class, so Mitch and I both knew enough high school level French to get around. But that day, at that moment, we engaged in the most fluent and convincing French conversation of our young lives. Oh, no wide-eyed, frisky American teens here, just two sophisticated French guys enjoying the beach, uninterested in some amazingly hot American girl and whether she took off her top. We were conjugating verbs like our lives depended on it. Eventually, the boyfriend got mad and left, and his girlfriend went topless. Mitch and I continued to play it cool, but this really did seem like the greatest thing that had ever happened. We talked about cheese and going to the library and whatever else our limited French vocabulary allowed us to talk about. Later that night, we both thanked our French teacher for the opportunity. She probably would have been disappointed to know what opportunity we exactly meant, but we left it vague and everyone was happy. C'est la vie. Now, OP, while I can't say I 100% agree with your motivations, I get it. I was a 17-year-old boy once too. That being said, I don't know if I've ever heard of a better motivator for a 17-year-old boy to speak French or learn French. So, mission successful for the teacher, I guess? I don't know what's happening here. Story 53. Went to a trade show in Prague, and I went out for dinner and drinks with a client and my boss. As we were waiting for a cab, I stepped away for a moment to snap a picture. When I walked back, my boss and client were talking to about half a dozen tipsy blonde girls. Danish blonde girls, I realized as I got close enough to hear them speak. As it turns out, I speak Danish. I listened for a bit to what they were saying. Typical drunk people stuff. Let's go out with them. This one's cute. Not me, I'm tired, etc. I finally opened up and started chatting in crude-ish Danish with them. Minds were blown. The Danes were surprised that some random dude actually spoke their language, but also my boss and client, who had no idea. The looks on their faces were priceless. Story 54. I sort of have the reverse of this. I'm a white man from the UK, and whilst visiting Berlin, was sat on the S-Bahn facing an older, also white lady. On the other side of the carriage, there were 4 gentlemen who were clearly Eastern European/Middle Eastern. I think they were speaking Turkish, but not sure. The lady turns to me and says in German something along the lines of, "Shameful. In Germany we speak in German." Loud enough they were supposed to hear, clearly looking for me to agree with her. To which I replied in my very broken German, "Ich bin English. Mein Deutsch ist sehr schlecht." Or, "I'm English, my German is very bad." Her face went bright red. Okay, so for most of the time when there was a different language written here, I wouldn't even try. I have, however, sung in German before, so I thought it'd be funny to give it my best, especially since OP was like very broken German, so I'm like, hey, perfect. So, let me know how I did. Probably not well. Story 55. I was at a Puerto Rican restaurant with 3 of my friends getting food. I was explaining to my friends how it all worked because they're all American and have never been exposed to this kind of food before. As I'm explaining, it seems like the 2 ladies behind us in line are laughing at us, saying stuff like, "Oh, look at the gringas," which is a Hispanic term for white girl basically, just making fun of the fact that no Spanish is being spoken in this Hispanic restaurant. As soon as I reach the counter to order, I bust out my Spanish. It's my native language after all. I purposefully look back at them and smile. Story 56. I was living in Amsterdam as a nanny and I was taking Dutch classes. After about 6 months, I got pretty good at understanding the language, including the slang, even though I couldn't produce it verbally very well yet. Well, I went to meet up with some guy friends of mine who were Dutch college-aged males, and they all started talking to their buddies in Dutch right in front of me about all the intimate acts I'd performed on them, and how I had a 4-way with them apparently. I immediately said to them, "Never talk to me again." They repeatedly attempted to apologize via text, but no, I never spoke to them again. I had no other friends for a while, but getting rid of those losers was worth the loneliness. I know that last time I said the word again, it was weird, okay? I would love to blame my Canadian accent. No, I have no idea why I say it like that. I literally have to think about the way I say the word again to not say again. Anyway, I would have retook it, but my voice is getting tired. Moving on. Story 57. My family is Cuban, but we look white as hell. In 2007, I was on a cruise with my parents, and we were sitting next to a Venezuelan couple on the open-air dock ordering food. The woman was looking at my parents and said loudly in Spanish, "He's so old. Why would a young woman like her marry him? Do you think the child is theirs?" Her husband replies, "No, probably he's the father's. He's too old to be the woman's. Oh, too ugly, too." My mother got very upset and just said, "Excuse me," in Spanish. The woman's face turned white and she started apologizing profusely. While my mother was telling them off, my dad was laughing his butt off. For the record, my parents are 3 years apart. My dad is only 3 years older, he just kinda looks ancient. Story 58. I speak a beginner's amount of French from taking it in university. When I was in Paris with my boyfriend, we were sitting at a restaurant called La du Falafel. Like many European restaurants, the tables are in close quarters. My boyfriend and I are chatting away in English, and when our food arrived, we began taking pictures to send to his mom, because, well, it is freaking delicious and the most beautiful plate I have ever laid eyes on. Two older French ladies sitting next to us started side-eyeing us as we did this. Though I couldn't fully understand them because only beginner French, they were laughing and clearly talking about us kids and our phones. Ils sont ridicules. While I don't know exactly what they were saying and wasn't offended at all, I still thought it'd be funny if they thought I could understand. So, at the next chance in our conversation, I said something in French to my boyfriend. I can't remember what it was exactly, very simple stuff, but in the past tense. It worked. They stopped talking instantly and looked a bit shocked. Story 59. Oddly enough, it was at a wrestling convention. I was meeting a lucha libre wrestler by the name of Sexy Star. I introduce myself to her, tell her it's so nice to meet her, and I point to the 8x10 I'd like her to sign. She asks me for my name and I say it. She asks me again and I say it again, this time in a Spanish accent. I'm Puerto Rican. She turns to another wrestler, Taya, and says in Spanish, "This jerk doesn't think I speak English and is trying to mock me." I told her, "I understand Spanish and every word you said. I didn't mean to mock you, I simply thought it might help if you heard my name with a Spanish accent." She got really red, signed the 8x10, took a photo with me, and that was that. Story 60. One language person here, but I've got a funny story. I worked with a group of Korean students when working on my degree. We worked in a catering kitchen. I used to listen to them talk all the time and would try to laugh when they laughed. They would notice and give me weird looks. One day they were building about 5,000 box lunches. I was working across from them on the hotline. One of them was placing bread, next was on protein, next was lettuce, tomato, and cheese. The guy who was placing the cheese ran out and went to go get more. He walked to the cheese cooler but couldn't find any cheddar. About a minute before he looked, I noticed a new hire grabbed the cheddar and returned it to the meat cabinet. Now, they all spoke Korean at work, but when he went over to the one in charge, I knew he was asking where the cheddar was. She walked him over to the cheese cabinet and also found that it was gone. In English, I say, "Miji, the cheddar is in the far cabinet next to the roast beef." Then I pretend that I'm not watching them. She walked to the meat cabinet, pulled out the cheese, and yelled to me, "Do you speak Korean?" "No." "How did you know what he asked for?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Miji." After all of that, they would switch to English when I was in the kitchen. Story 61. Reversed story. On a bus with schoolmates in Berlin, 1973. Headed to the American golf course. Summertime. Bus is filled. Standing room only. Lady behind me has thick red lipstick on. Really thick. Thinking only us Americans spoke English, I said, "Guys, look at this lady behind me. That lipstick couldn't get any thicker." Couple of the guys look and laugh. Smart Alec best friend goes, "You shouldn't make fun of other people," all serious like. Then the lady behind me says, "That's what I think. Mind your own business," in perfect English. I'm 2 feet small by then, as everyone on the bus who spoke English burst out in laughter at me. Couldn't get off that bus fast enough. A very valuable lesson learned that day. Story 62. I teach English to adults as a summer job, and this happens quite a lot. Most of my colleagues are monolingual, and as a pale ginger guy, nobody expects me to speak Spanish. Most of the time it's boring stuff, but occasionally, some juicy gossip. A worrying number of them seem to be completely fine with cheating on their partners back home. Sometimes I'll hear a story or a joke from one of the students and then use it as an example or exercise later in the week, which always confuses them. I tend to be roughly the same age as most of my students, I'm 22, and despite being an average-looking man, a lot of them seem to find me attractive. Guess it's the whole teacher thing, or maybe gingers are exotic to them, I don't know. Anyway, on my last day of work at one school, the Spanish girl, who was 21, was talking about me to her friend on the phone while I was setting up the lesson. She was going into quite some detail about what she wanted to do with me, assuming I wouldn't understand. I carried on with what I was doing without reacting, waited for her to hang up, and said in Spanish, "Come and find me after class and we can arrange something." Story 63. I was at a hotel bar in New York, and a Russian couple were sitting a few chairs down from me talking about what they should do for the evening. So I suggested they should go to Rockefeller Center to see the tree. It was a couple of days before Christmas. They were shocked an American could speak Russian, and they were super pleasant people. They bought me a drink and talked about their impressions of New York for 20 minutes or so before they went out for the night. I was able to give them some advice, and they gave me an ego boost by complimenting my Russian. Story 65. My uncle has a good one. My family are originally from India/Pakistan and speak Urdu, but my mom's family moved to rural Arkansas in the late 70s. It was a really small town, like never seen brown people small, but they ended up living there for over 20 years. Anyway, when my uncle was in high school, they had a math teacher from Japan. One day, the teacher was berating my uncle for something, in English of course, and my uncle got mad and cursed him out in Urdu. The teacher replied very calmly in Urdu, "Don't ever use that sort of language in my class again. Understand?" pretty sure my uncle's jaw hit the floor. He didn't expect a Japanese guy living in a small town in Arkansas to speak Urdu. Okay, of all the ones here, that's just unlucky. I would literally never see that coming. The universe just decided to punish your uncle that day. Story 66. Being Canadian, I speak English and French. Years ago, I was posted to Germany with the Canadian military. My friend came to visit me and we booked a trip through a German travel agency to France. So we got on a bus full of Germans and off we went. When we arrived at the hotel in France, we were all lined up to check in. My friend and I were near the end of the line. As the line slowly progressed, the two French hotel staff members who were checking us in and speaking German to the tourists started speaking in a lower voice to one another. They were bad-mouthing all of us tourists in French. I could hear their speaking and understood every word. They were saying things about how Germans only drink beer and eat sausages and don't appreciate fine French food and wine or culture. How Germans are loud and other non-complimentary things. My friend and I were smiling at each other listening to all of this. When we got to the front of the line, they asked in German for our passports. We handed them our Canadian passports and asked them, in French, if they could recommend a good French restaurant that had a nice wine list. Oh, and could they also recommend a museum nearby? They looked at us, the girl turned red, and then mumbled something about a restaurant around the corner and a museum a few streets over. I thanked them in French, took our key, and left them standing there looking flustered. I feel like this is way riskier anywhere in that area of Europe, you know? Because I'm not saying they all know each other's languages, but the odds I feel are higher. I wonder what the stats are actually on Germans who know French. Also, as a Canadian who does not know fluent French, I'm over here sweating. OP just called me dumb and didn't even know it. Anyway, that is the final story for today. I feel like this is one that some of you might have stories for, so if you do, throw them in the comments. For now though, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I will see you in the next one.